The 2024 election is teed up to be one of the most contentious elections of our lifetime. What can get lost in all the pundit talking head segments and social media arguments are the actual policy proposals of each candidate. For this reason, every 4 years, we like to bring 2 episodes focused on the employment law changes and policies we might see depending on which of the main party candidates win the election. For the first episode, we will focus on Harris's anticipated policy proposals when it comes to employees and employers. Welcome back to Employment Law After Hours. Today we're diving into the potential employment law changes we might see if Kamala Harris wins the presidency in 2024. From worker protections to labor rights, there are some key areas to consider, so let's break it all down. Before we get started, we must state that these proposals are based on both published policy positions and also expectations based on party loyalty and proposals made during previous stints in office. Both Harris and Trump are incumbents to the White House, obviously with Harris being the current vice president. Therefore, we do have information to go off of to anticipate their respective policy positions. Let's start with employee minimum wages and worker protections. Kamala Harris has been a strong proponent of raising the federal minimum wage. If she wins the presidency, we expect renewed efforts to raise the wage to approximately $15 per hour nationwide, possibly with a more staggered approach that would slowly increase the minimum wage over a few-year period. It is important to note that the current federal minimum wage is just $7.25 per hour, drastically less than most states' own minimum wages, except a few that appear tied to the federal minimum wage. Harris has also supported efforts to strengthen worker protections by enhancing OSHA standards and broadening the reach of the Fair Labor Standards Act. This means we could see more aggressive policies around workplace safety, potentially more stringent standards in certain industries, such as the recent regulations that were issued by OSHA, covering more protections for outdoor employees. While we're on this topic, let's not forget about overtime protections, especially for gig and service industry workers, particularly Uber, DoorDash, and other similar positions. Many of these companies consider their gig workers to be independent contractors, meaning they aren't entitled to the many protections of the Fair Labor Standards Act, such as ensuring minimum wage and overtime pay. Last year, the Biden administration updated the factors utilized to determine whether someone is an independent contractor or an employee. These factors may be further interpreted to achieve the goal of bringing gig workers under the protections of being an employee rather than an independent contractor. But this is largely going to be a requirement of the courts or otherwise up to Harris to revise some of those regulations. Based on her policy position as posted on her campaign website, we expect Harris to work with the IRS and Congress to eliminate taxes on tips for service and hospitality workers, thereby increasing wages for these employees, many of whom are earning less than minimum wage as a result of the tipped minimum wage rules. Let's now shift to the anticipated proposals giving employees paid leave for certain medical conditions and other family obligations. Harris has historically supported paid family and medical leave policies, aiming for at least 12 weeks of paid leave for all workers, such as the paid leave that many Europeans enjoy. If elected, we can expect federal action in this space, perhaps following the model of existing state-level programs, such as those already existing in 13 states. Harris has also voiced strong support for child care support programs, so we could see federal initiatives that provide employers with incentives to offer child care assistance to their employees, which some really see as a win-win for both the employer and the employee. However, given the limitations of the Fair Labor Standards Act and recent Supreme Court decisions impacting the authority of administrative agencies, we expect that such leave would need to come from an act of Congress, which Harris would then sign into law. Next, Harris is a supporter of organized labor and has indicated she would push for changes that make it easier for workers to unionize, including through card check systems and eliminating the right-to-work laws. On top of that, we could see major reforms targeting the gig economy. Think about reclassifying gig workers like Uber and Lyft drivers as employees rather than independent contractors, which we discussed up above, which would bring sweeping changes to the industries that rely on freelance work, such as allowing them possibly the right to unionize. Before we get to our final proposals that we'll likely see, let's cover non-competes for a moment. As this channel previously discussed just a few weeks ago, earlier this year, the Biden administration issued regulations through the Federal Trade Commission to eliminate non-competes nationwide. A move which the FTC had hoped would increase competition, increase wages for workers, and allow free movement of workers. Subsequently, in late August of this year, the Northern District of Texas issued a decision permanently staying the enforcement of the FTC's final rule banning non-competes, meaning these non-competes would now remain valid and enforceable subject to state law limitations, such as those that exist in California, Oklahoma, Minnesota, and Colorado. Despite this setback, we expect that the Harris administration will try to continue this work through the FTC to more narrowly prohibit non-competes, such as those in certain industries or those that are subject to certain pay or levels of employment before they can be subjected to a non-compete. The banning of non-competes really appears to be a bipartisan issue, with representatives from both sides really favoring such policy, so I think we'll get something done in that area. Next, Harris has championed policies aimed at reducing workplace discrimination with a particular focus on gender and racial pay gaps. We expect to see stronger enforcement of pay equality laws, more stringent diversity reporting requirements, such as increasing the existing requirements of the EEOC reporting obligations, and greater penalties for companies that violate anti-discrimination laws. The Biden administration has already increased actions by the EEOC during his term, and we expect the EEOC's investigations to continue to increase during the Harris's administration, serving as a check on employers. We also expect to see formal regulations and statutes aimed at protecting LGBTQ employees in the workplace. Although the Supreme Court only recently ruled that gender identity, gender expression, and sexual orientation were covered under the definition of sex under the Civil Rights Act, as we've recently seen, the Supreme Court is likely to backtrack on certain decisions in the future, with this recent one awarding these rights likely to be on the chopping block. Harris may seek to bypass an overruling of this decision by implementing regulations or pressuring the passage of laws from Congress to protect LGBTQ employees in the workplace. Kamala Harris wins the presidency, we're looking at some significant changes that could reshape the landscape of employment law, focusing on fairness, worker protections, and labor rights. Although some of these changes will require acts of Congress, we expect that Harris will strongly campaign for these changes with her connections to Congress and those that would be required to pass these laws. As always, stay tuned to Employment Law After Hours for more updates as we watch how this all unfolds. Subscribe so you do not miss out on our next episode covering the employment law changes or actions we may see under a Trump presidency. We'll see you again next time.